All right, everyone, it's time for the final sort of midterms omnibus, and right the day before the election, which I believe is Monday, I will be talking to H.A. Goodman, actually. He's got a sort of a BitChute exclusive thing going on there. He's partnering with them to do political chat. I will be on there, I believe, to speak about this issue. This is sort of the last time I'll be weighing in before doing a stream. I do plan to do a live event on the election itself. I'm going to wait till some results start coming in. I'm going to go live like half an hour later, just start looking at the race. I'll have, probably RCP and some other things open at the time. I would like to get a couple of people in, actually, during the proceedings. Slow chats, obviously, will be on. What I'd like to do is maybe get HA, who will also be streaming, maybe get him in briefly, if that's possible. Maybe he's streaming after or before or something. I'd like to talk to some other people. I've got some ideas, although I might just do it straight up like I did the last election for fucking almost 6 hours. It won't be that long this time since it's the midterms. Here's the thing, though. It's time to do some analysis. Number one in the Senate, and I told Gavin this the other day. I don't know if he's got his actual podcast up with the segment yet. My general expectation is there's a spread. I mean, you can't give always an exact number. My expectation for the Republicans is that they exit the midterms with 53 to 55 in the Senate, with 54 at this point being my best guess. That's because they go in with 50 already. The Democrats are well behind. They have to win the all, essentially, of the remaining competitive races just to break even, knock one seat out under the Republicans, and end up with a tie. There is no longer a way for the Democrats really to retake the Senate. Texas is safe. Esteval the other day was trying to ruminate on the one recent poll that showed Cruz only ahead by 3, and I pointed out this is this is a statistical outlier in a batch of polls over the last week whose average shows Cruz up by about 7. It could be as much as 10. One of the polls says that, so why don't you use that as your cherry pick poll? Because that's a bad idea. My best guess is that Ted Cruz handily wins re-election. The Republicans managed to grab Tennessee. They've been riding ahead there. There was one poll that showed Bredesen up by a point in Tennessee. That's, an outlier. Every single other poll for, 2 months has shown his opponent up. The Republicans have gained Tennessee. They start off at 50. There are, technically speaking, 9 competitive races, 6 of which are actually competitive. I favor the Republicans at this point to win in Missouri. I don't think McCaskill can weather the storm. There's some degree of reason to believe that Sinema is losing support in Arizona. It's like Missouri. It tends to lean red. The tendency is towards the Republicans. You've got a vulnerable incumbent who has been recently embroiled in scandal. Another surprise might be Florida. Now, hear me out. Bill Nelson, the Democrat, has been ahead in most of the polling, but by a very, very slim margin that's not fully reflected in early voting. And Andrew Gillum, who's a Democrat running for governor, just got slamma-jammed back to the Stone Age. He may lose his bid for the gubernatorial election based, again, on what Project Veritas has released. My general thinking is that if Gillum loses enough support to lose the gubernatorial race, 3 or 4 points probably, it trickles down at least a little to some voters that are also voting between Bill Nelson and Rick Scott. I believe both of them are former governors, by the way. Rick Scott was the governor before. I think, wasn't Bill Nelson at least a challenger? Like, they've had a long-term feud. I can remember that from when I was physically in Florida, I think, and that was a long time ago. So it could trickle down. A single point of movement could make or break the race. We're going to have a squeaker there, I think, that'll be a lot like Trump versus Clinton in Florida in the last election, or Bush v. Gore, or really any other election. Florida has become the bellwether almost of the country, as opposed to people for a long time said it's like New Hampshire or Maine before that, Iowa, Ohio. All of those are growing more red, or in New Hampshire's case, more blue. Florida, though, has been remarkably swing state status for a very long time. I think we need to start looking to Florida as the average demographics of the country, for better or for worse. Of course, northern and southern Florida being like 2 different worlds. I would favor the Republicans slightly to pick up Florida at this point. Again, that's not by any means assured. The other thing is, between all of these other races, you keep having these things that are affecting them. Like Veritas released Beto O'Rourke stuff the other day. I'll be covering that separately. That pretty much guarantees Ted Cruz, by the way, the victory there. If we look to Montana, I incorrectly speculated yesterday based on partially false reporting. The initial report was that the Libertarian had dropped out to endorse the GOP in Montana, which would have thrown the race into a statistical tie territory. The Democrats have been ahead by a few points. That extra 2 or 3 points that the Libertarians garner there typically would have put it into tie status. I would have favored the Republicans. That's not actually true. The Libertarian candidate was simply mad that a mailer went out from the Democrats and was siding with the GOP on that one. The mailer being sent out by some rogue Democratic group that was trying to get Republican voters to back the Libertarian by pretending to be like from the far right. Again, a false flag, a fake mailer. Astonishing how that actually does happen in close races. But it could still shake up the race because it's been reported widely. Some people literally could have cast their ballot in frustration at the time without realizing that it wasn't technically an endorsement. And then you go to Indiana where Joe Donnelly has been riding a couple points ahead, but just put his foot in his mouth in the final debate. Having an extremely bad final debate is an extremely bad thing potentially for your campaign. I would call that race now, which would have leaned very slightly blue, now a full toss-up. It's a 50-50 shot. It depends on how much poll movement there is. There's obviously been no systemic poll movement as far as any of these Senate races towards the Democrats in the wake of, a synagogue shooting by the anti-Trumper there. So, barring that being the true October surprise, it looks like it really is. It's about Veritas. It's about Veritas getting McCaskill, probably stopping her, probably stopping Gillum at this point. His scandal was 10 times worse. Going after, again, Beto O'Rourke, he's already behind, and then Sinema in Arizona, really. Be interesting to see if there are further releases. Now on to the House. Again, I'm not giving a final prediction in the House. It's a 50-50 deal. Because the problem is there are 35 or so toss-up races. Either party needs to win most of them to retain power. The problem is that for most of those races, we don't have proper polling. There's either only 1 or 2 polls. That's no good. Their sampling size in some cases is way off of what I would like to see. They're old polls like, hey, the last poll was in the middle of October. Well, that doesn't reflect reality. That's several weeks ago in an extremely partisan, extremely chaotic political environment. That's worth literally less than nothing to me. You might as well tell me that the poll is 50-50 because that's what it technically represents. The fact that they've still got toss-up status at this point is because you had, at the beginning of October, a massive slew of polls. The Republicans, by the way, at the time gained like 10 expected seats at that time because in polling they were doing much better than in the past. The general consensus of the Democrats being 20 seats ahead no longer held true. Now it's like 5 or 6 seats in the expectations. The problem being, if we look at the number of races there and the number of races for which we don't have proper data, it's impossible to determine where those races go. Therefore, it's impossible. I mean, some of these races that are declared lean Democrat or Republican, again, you've got the same polling problem. One poll 2 weeks ago says the Democrats 3 points ahead, so it leans to the Democrats. Okay, maybe. You don't know, though, at this point because it's so old. And then with Trump's approval apparently stable at 44, that's pretty close to the mark. I said 45 was the magic number. The situation has changed somewhat, but I don't think particularly. The thing is this. Because his approval is not at 45, and because therefore he's not capable of campaigning in quite as many House districts as possible, I would say my gut feeling favors the Democrats narrowly winning the House. But I can't make that official prediction because there are too many races for which I don't have data. I like to see a lot more data. Like the Senate, it's like, hey, we got 5 polls this week. In the House, it's like, hey, we've got 2 polls the whole cycle. There's a huge difference between those two. My guess is that the Republicans handily win in the House, gain a few seats. Again, 53 to 55 is the spread I give. Goodman, I think 56 to 58. He's more optimistic on their chances. Some people are claiming that they expect the GOP to gain House seats, like not only grab the toss-ups, but they're, I think, expecting that systemic polling bias is the same as 2016. If that's true, yeah, the Republicans in theory could actually gain in the House. I just don't expect that. I don't think that there's going to be quite as much differential turnout in favor of the Republicans, regardless of what early voting says. We've got to be more conservative, pardon the pun, with regards to our expectations. I do hope that the Democrats at least fail to take the House because it will cause political chaos. For months and months to come, the Democrats will be autopsying their own party. It's not, hey, we're going to pick apart why we lost. It's more like, hey, we're going to pick apart why we can't win elections at all anymore. What are we doing wrong? We're supposedly running against the party of the next Hitler. I don't understand it. And probably what they'll do is they'll double down with their neo-lib whistling to the social justice warriors. And they'll say, oh, it's because of all the Nazis. See, hate is rising in the United States. It's becoming more popular. We need to do something. We need more censorship. We need more immigrants or whatever. They'll do the same stupid shit, and they'll continue to ignore reality, and they'll get curb stomped in 2020 if they do that. Meanwhile, if they win the House, Nancy Pelosi becomes the next House leader. Great for Trump, great for the Republicans. I think that they don't care if they win the House. There's a reason that they too are fixated on a Senate that they're favored to handily retain anyway. They're favored to retain this. Even Nate Silver favors them to retain the Senate power there by a couple of seats. They'd probably gain a seat or two even under his estimations. He's giving him, an 85% chance of controlling the Senate at the end of the election. I say it's a 95% chance. And in the House, it's a 50-50 proposition. Everyone's like, oh my God, the Republicans are doing so terribly. I'm not sure that's the case, and now it looks like the Florida gubernatorial race might go Republican. Gillum has been generally ahead in the polling by a few points. He's getting slammed now. He was implicated in a major scandal. Hey, basically, one of his upper-level staffers saying, yeah, he doesn't have any intention to honor his promises whatsoever. That's pretty bad for his campaign. At the very least, that's going to lose him some support. That's about all. Peace out.